If we go from Jesus to Adam by counting all the genealogies, and then if we go from Adam to the flood, we get the date 2348 BC. Modern day Egyptologists date the Egyptian chronology way past that. It's also really awkward because you have the pyramids who should have been destroyed, but it looks like they weren't. It's made a lot of people different question the date, whether it's the Egyptologists that are wrong or the Bible that's wrong. Hey everyone, this is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today I'm on with linguist Mo, otherwise known as Adam Tippett. We're going to be talking about Egyptian chronology, whether it contradicts with answers in Genesis and young earth creationism, and the date of the flood. So, Adam, how are you doing today? And just give us your background.
Hey guys. I've got a master's degree from Liberty University in Biblical Studies. I also studied Hebrew and Greek there. And currently, I've just was accepted into Southeastern Baptist University or University Seminary, excuse me, for my THM, and then going on into a PhD for Old Testament text criticism. So my first semester will be starting in January, and I'll be taking Aramaic actually as far as that and another course. So yeah.
Awesome. Sounds like fun. Yeah, so
hmm
Adam, he is a very devout Christian. He loves God. He's on here to help people understand the Bible better. And he spent a lot of time talking with Egyptologists like David Falk and interacting with many others. And he's here to just talk about his knowledge on the topic here. So,
hmm
so we got a problem here. And the problem is that there are young earth creationists
hmm
and other Christians that they take certain passages in the Bible very literally, and that
hmm
includes the genealogies. And if we go from us today, well, actually, if we go from Jesus to Adam, and by counting all the genealogies, and then if we go from Adam to the flood, we get the date 2348 BC. And that makes things really awkward because modern day Egyptologists date the Egyptian chronology way past that.
hmm
And it's also really awkward because you have the pyramids who would have been destroyed, but
hmm
apparently it seems to be a contradiction there. They should have been destroyed, but it looks like they weren't.
Yeah.
And it's made a lot of people different question the date, whether it's the Egyptologists that are wrong or the Bible that's wrong. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, can you give us, Adam,
Mhm.
the pyramids are obviously a problem, but it's made much worse because there's, someone had to build the pyramids, and there had to be
Mhm.
people that existed before the pyramids. It's not like they got off the ark and they just all of a sudden started building pyramids.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about how far modern Egyptologists date, how far back, like the chronology goes?
Yeah, the chronology goes back. Let's see here. The pyramids, we're talking about the Great Pyramids of Giza here. They were built during the fourth dynasty of Egypt during the Old Kingdom. And like you said, that would be the third millennium around 2670 BC. But Egypt is even, or the Old Kingdom extends even further back than that, since this was the fourth dynasty. You've got Djoser, who created or who built, or his architect, um, Imhotep built the a step pyramid in the third dynasty. You get the second dynasty of all the way back to the first. So that goes all the way back into the third millennium or early third millennium BC, whereas this is it's about mid third millennium BC when the pyramids were built. So even Egyptian history and chronology goes back even further than that, possibly 3000 BC. So it's right up there with Mesopotamia and Babylon and ancient Sumer. So
Okay, yeah. So you kind of went into it, but people are going to ask, like, what is Egyptian chronology? Can you talk about what it is exactly?
mhm.
Maybe get into a little bit like how they calculate it.
Yeah, so Egyptian chronology is based off of different texts like the Abydos King list. You've got the Palermo stone, which dates to the fifth dynasty of Egypt, which is right before the Old Kingdom collapsed. Again, that would be late third millennium. Archaeological evidence, of course, and these king lists, along with a guy called Monotho, which most people, if they're watching, would probably at least have heard of Monotho. Um, so who dates it back? Monotho's the one who organized them into dynasties, like 30 dynasties. Um,
And what's a dynasty or dynasty?
it's just a family line. That's it. That's it. It's just a family line. When one family line stopped, another one started. That started a new dynasty. So the dynasty, I think, is another. Sorry for the Americans who. So
All right,
yeah.
so many people have heard that the Egyptian chronology is bulletproof.
Hmm.
How would you categorize, or how would you describe how Egyptologists today, like, how accurate do they think the chronology is?
Um, Me included, but they also they think it's pretty airtight. At least going back, if you go back to the sacking of Thebes in 664 BC, everything is virtually set in stone. That was when the Assyrians came and sacked Thebes. I was in 664, and ever since then, 664 and forwards, it is airtight. So, going back further than 664, that's where we're off about 3 or 4 or 5 years, based on again, we'll get into it later, I think, but synchronism, things like synchronisms and archaeological evidence. So,
So the way I'm understanding it is what they do is they have, by calculating all these numbers that you start with what with like pretty good certainty. What is it?
hmm
Just battles,
hmm
you know, people that lived during the time, matching it up with people, say around the 600 BC mark and before that or after
hmm
that. And they, were super confident about those. But then later than that, from 3000 ish BC to 600 BC, you have different parts where some of them are more confident than the others. Is that a good way to say it?
yeah. So, I would say that during the pre-dynastic period and the intermediate periods, things there, we usually it's on archaeological evidence, so we'll find rings um, of various kings. More of that is common during the Egyptian when it's an empire in the New Kingdom. We see which would be the 18th dynasty, which is what the 16th and 15th 14th centuries BC. So we find rings, like Egyptian rings in the Levant, that let us know that there was an Egyptian presence there. We can also date, um, based on these rings, on what name of the pharaoh is on the signet ring, um, to that site, that this city, like for example, Jericho has a ring of, I think, Amenhotep the third, I think it's the third. So we can date Jericho was occupied. Now Jericho's older than that, of course, but it was at least it was occupied at that time, going back then. Um, as far as if we're going back to the pre-dynastic period and the intermediate periods, it gets a little muddled. So, especially during periods of upheavals and fragmentations, like the first, second, and third intermediate periods, for example, yeah, the moment leading up to the first intermediate period, you had the fifth dynasty, and the sixth dynasty, when the power was waning with the pharaohs. They were wrestling powers with the local nomarchs or governors that ruled the 42 nomarchs of Egypt. And then it culminated in the collapse of the Old Kingdom in the sixth dynasty. So by the time you get to the seventh and eighth, ninth and 10th dynasties, um, we know there were kings who said they were the king of Egypt, or nomarch tombs, where there was war, there was not so much chaos, but yeah, pretty much at the same time. I'm not saying it's chaos, but uh, so things like that. You had nomarchs fighting each other for power and supremacy and stuff.
So
And
basically, just things would get destroyed, and that's why we
mhm,
don't have
yeah,
things from them to date.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So,
You mentioned how there's certain periods where they are not very well as known, but you also said before that we're very confident. airtight after the 600 BC mark, but
Hmm.
then before that, there's you're very confident up to like 5 years or so. But
Yeah.
besides that, you said that there are times where you're not confident. How would you describe those not confident time periods?
I I really wouldn't. I'm confident because, again, you got the archaeology and the king lists as well. So they reveal this upheaval and this fragmentation. So we're pretty confident that there were these fragmentations of the seventh, eighth, and ninth and 10th dynasties, for example, in the first dynasty. So with things like that, I'm fairly confident. We can still piece it together within 5 years or so, but we just don't know really what's going on as far as that's concerned. So we've got,
So maybe,
temple.
mhm. I was just gonna say maybe something like, for 100 years time span, you know that there are three pharaohs, but you don't know
Mhm.
exactly how
You
long
don't
they
know.
reigned. You know there are three pharaohs, but you just don't
Mhm.
know how long they reigned.
Exactly. We don't know how long they reigned. We don't know the extent of their territory. If did they really conquer another nomarch? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay, that
Mhm.
makes sense. All right. So let's talk about how we're confident. I mean, you hear all these, different, websites or David Roll, Patterns and Evidence. They're saying like, we need to change all of the Egyptian chronology. Let's talk about why Egyptologists are so confident in in the Egyptian chronology in general.
I would say the king lists is a good starting point.
The most intuitive method of building a chronology is what's called the additive method. And essentially, how it works is you take the reign of one king and you add it on top of another, and so on and so on and so on. It is used, but it has limits. Anyway, let's take an example of this. So what we do is we have a king with whom there is an established date. Then you add your next king, followed by your next, and so on until you build up an entire chronology. And the additive method works reasonably well with short chronological sequences, such as if you're calculating the reigns of a well-known dynasty where the reign lengths of each king are well known and well established.
The Palermo stone we've already mentioned. The Abydos king list we've mentioned. You've got the Turin canon as well. Again, Monothos, Egyptaica, even though that's substantially later. Um, the Demotic Chronicle. So you want to couple that with like genealogies, with kings. Original, yeah, I'd say original documents. I think one of the best, some of the best documents, as far as the New Kingdom is concerned, is their Amana letters with so many synchronisms with other kings of these Canaanite city states, in the 15th, in the 14th century, excuse me. Um, Things like that. You've got the, if we could, if getting out of Egyptian chronology, you got the Babylonian Chronicle, which serves is a great source as well for kings outside of Egypt, but that's a different topic. Um, as far as genealogy is concerned, we could it's definitely like, Unitarian synthetic. So yeah, using three men here, we can establish, a synchronism with if you can establish a synchronism with another, king or nobleman, for example, and then there's a synchronism with that king, that same nobleman, with another one. You can like, triangulate, I guess, to use a lack lack of a better term, that these three people existed at the same time. They were contemporaneous with, each other.
These synchronisms act as limiters. Now, what is a limiter? A limiter is a synchronism that prevents two kings lists from moving in respect to each other, relative to each other. And you can see in the graphic here how those two synchronisms prevent the movement of the kings list. The importance of limiters to doing a chronology is not just that they lock up these two, but limiters exist across the ancient Near East. So what happens is if you have enough of these limiters, that the entire chronology of the ancient Near East locks up in place.
As far as documents and archaeological evidence, we have the peace treaty of King Ramesses II, which ties him to Hattusili III. There's a synchronism there. We also have things like the Black Obelisk, which ties King Jehu with Shalmaneser III. So things like that really.
Wouldn't it say that in Falk's website?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if we go over here to something called, I don't know if I should share my screen
Here we
if
go.
I've got that up. Yeah. Here we go. If we scroll down here, this is called groundhogchronology.com. You can do a simple Google search on this. This is made by Dr. David Falk a few years ago, like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago at maximum. But he's been working on this since before then. So, but if we scroll down here to, might have passed it now. Yeah, here we are. The United Monarchy right here. I don't know if you can see that with the mouse. You go to Solomon here, which is the third king of the United Monarchy, and you see these green lines. You'll see a synchronism here. There's the death and birth of Solomon. I think that's just the death. And go up here, and here as well. This one, there's a synchronism with Jeroboam, who also has a synchronism with Shishonk the first of the third intermediate period, the 22nd dynasty. So that is a great example of how a synchronism works. So
What exactly is a synchronism?
A synchronism
Yeah.
synchronism is when you have two individuals who are mentioned on the same document, like an Armana letter, and or another document included. That's pretty much all a synchronism is. So, with
Can
the
you
biblical account,
give some examples?
other than the
No,
black obelisk, the black
do
obelisk is one.
you have yes, you have Black Obelisk, which is
Yeah,
just, what is that? Just a list, or
the
just
black
a big,
obelisk
yeah.
is an obelisk, so it's and it's black. And it lists the names of kings that were tributing the Assyrian kings. So Jehu's on that list of the obelisk. And if you look at the biblical account, it actually mentions that he's paying tribute to, I want to say it's Shalmaneser III. So that would be a synchronism. Another one, I think I mentioned this already, was the peace treaty signed between the Egyptians and the Hittites with Ramesses II and Hattusili III. So that's evidence of another synchronism. So,
And why exactly do the synchronisms help date?
they help. It's pretty strong evidence of the two or three individuals existing at the same time in the same period. So they would be contemporaneous with each other.
It's like, why would you be writing a letter to someone that didn't exist?
That didn't exist, that had already died or wasn't even born yet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
hard to write to someone that if they don't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. All right, so can you go into a little bit more detail, like how exactly Dr. David Falk's software works here?
Well, if you start at the top, here's the top, and then you work your way back, scrolling down, you work your way back in time. And I think how far back does this go? Yeah, the first intermediate period. So this goes back to the 3rd millennium BCE or BC, whatever you decide to use. So you've got the Old Kingdom here in Egypt. This is the 3rd dynasty here. And as you scroll up, you're going forwards in time. So there's the 4th, then there's the 5th. And I think, Falk's got this the way it is, so he could get the synchronisms right with these lines. So, but going up like this is going forwards in time. You got Ebla, you've got the old Assyrian kingdom, Mari, the middle kingdom over here to the left. And each of these green lines is a synchronism. So Zimri Lin of Mari, he's got several synchronisms. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a contemporary of Hammurabi. Yeah. So if you Zimri Lim, for example, has a synchronism with the Mari. His name is mentioned in a Mari letter A 482. And if you follow that all the way down, you'll see that Hammurabi is also synchronized with him. So Hammurabi and Zimri Lim lived within each other, were contemporaries of each other.
Interesting. Okay. So explain to us what happens if you do something like David Roll and move the chronology 300 years.
If you remove or move, if you either remove 300 years or move it forward, it really throws everything out of whack. One of the things Roll argues out is that, if I can find it here, that Shishonk and the Egyptian king Shishonk and Shishak are not the same individual. So that's how he gets around this synchronism here with Shishonk and Shishak. He says Shishak is another pharaoh and he exists in a different time. Like, I'm not sure how much time. I'd have to look it up again, but that they're not the same person. So if you if you go forward 300 years, and take it out, you're gonna do it. It throws everything out of whack, basically. So, you're gonna have the pyramids. You're gonna move the pyramids down 300 years, which would put them at 2200 BC, which would be in the time of, scrolling down quickly here, that would be in the time of let's see here. Yeah, the Middle Kingdom. Somewhere around the Middle Kingdom, which would be the 11th dynasty in Egypt.
And why doesn't that make sense?
Well, it wouldn't make sense if you move the chronology 300 years, but the problem is you'd have the 11th dynasty supposedly reigning, and then they're like, oh no, the pyramids are there because of the synchronisms here, because you also had a consecutive dynasty 12 reigning at the same, at least with the okay, let me clarify this here. Mentuhotep IV here, which is where my cursor is, he was living at the time of the first king of the 12th dynasty, Amenemhet I, before the 12th dynasty took over. So if you move the pyramids up 300 years, they're going to be in this time frame with the Middle Kingdom. And the 4th dynasty, which was when the pyramids were built, could not have existed in the same time as the Middle Kingdom. Now,
Why
he'll
not?
probably say, well, if we're moving this 300 years forward, then you gotta, it snowballs is what I'm saying. So it'll just snowball. You move everything back 300 years. And then you get up to 664, which is air. Now, remember when I said 664 and forwards, everything's set in stone. You keep moving it 300 years and you'll get up to like 664, and it just, yeah.
So for someone that doesn't understand it very well, what exactly is the issue here? I mean, obviously you've got a bunch of lines on the screen, and I guess those lines would be broken, I would assume, if you move it.
Yeah, you'd break the lines. You would erase the synchronisms on each one. And it would really throw everything into confusion. And the letter, I really have a difficult time putting something like David Roll's chronology into use because of that. You'd lose that synchronism with Shishonk, Jeroboam, and Solomon here. For one, these lines would break, even though we have archaeological evidence that Shishonk actually invaded the Levant. There's biblical evidence and then Egyptian evidence based on the Bubastite portal. So that would cease to be a synchronism, even if you remove the 300 years and move, So Roll wants to get rid. If my calculations are right with Roll wants to get rid of like something like the third intermediate period because there wasn't a lot of stuff going on with him. So yeah, sorry, my dog was barking there. So yeah, that's the thing with his chronology is it removes the 300 years and it forces the pyramids up 300 years to align biblically, but it just doesn't work because it would overlap with this other with things that would be going on as well. Um, it would really disrupt the synchronisms.
So maybe, in other words, you have different texts. You have some like Babylonian texts, some Hittite texts, some Egyptian texts, and
Mhm.
if you move the Egyptian text, these Babylonian texts are connected
Mhm.
to specific Egyptian texts, and if
Yeah.
you move those, then you
Mhm.
either have to move the Babylonian text, but the Babylonian texts are uh, we are very confident that they're linked to these other texts.
Mhm.
So if you move the Egyptian text, then it puts all these other different things out of whack where you've got, and what this graph shows is that you've got a whole bunch of different lines going in everywhere, and each one of those is a piece of evidence connecting one king or one person with another king. And if you move it, you destroy that link. And
Mhm.
the question is like, when you're trying to figure out what is the best answer for something, when you have 7 lines or whatever, or in this case maybe even 300 or whatever for one specific uh, you know timetable, and
Yeah.
you destroy it, you move it just to do that, you're destroying all these other links, and
Yes, absolutely.
that just seems impossible when we already
Mhm.
have a chronology that seems to work already.
Yeah, exactly. It would seem impossible.
Gotcha. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go to objections. So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is we're going to go like that. All right,
Okay.
objections. So, in preparation for this, what I wanted to do is I wanted to understand, you know, what young Earth creationists do with this, because this is obviously a really difficult question. You have, Egyptian chronology in general is extremely complicated, and
Mhm.
but at the same time, you got Answers in Genesis is a really big organization. They should be able to, figure these kind of things out, right? So let's
Mhm.
look into what they say. So I'm going to read a quote from me from one of the websites here. It
Yep.
says, most modern historians worship Manetho's chronological record of the Egyptian kings as if it were the gold standard. Many know it contradicts other portions of acknowledged secular historical interpretations and certainly biblical history, but nonetheless, they seem to cling to it like a drowning man to a piece of flotsam. And apparently, flotsam is like some kind of wreckage of his ship. So basically, they
Mhm.
hold on to Manetho's record. And another article I read said traditional Egyptian chronology is built on Manetho's history and the Sothic theory. In
Mhm.
the 3rd century BC, Manetho compiled a list of pharaohs and links of their reigns. Now, one, can you talk maybe a little bit more detail on exactly what Manetho is? Like, obviously, that was Egyptian, I guess, historian in some regard
He
that made
was
a bunch of. Yeah, go for it.
so Manetho was an Egyptian priest who lived during the Ptolemaic period. And he wrote an Egyptian chronology, if you will, in his Egyptaica. And it's a king list. It's just dynasties and kings that he created. And we kind of base off the dynasty paradigm or whatever you want to call it, the dynasties that ruled Egypt for 3,000 years. We use that system. So, no, we don't worship Monotho. Um, I think he's kind of using that pejoratively, but um, I think it's pretty obvious, but anyway, uh, um, we don't worship Monotho. Although Monotho is useful, like I just said, he's the one that established the 30 dynasties that ruled Egypt over 3,000 years. But we also have other things that we use for Egyptian chronology that we've been talking about already, like the synchronisms, and the archaeological evidence, like finding rings, signet rings in Levant, finding the tombs littered throughout Egypt, the pyramids, um, and things like that. One good chronology would be the Abydos King list, which was found in the Temple of Seti I, or the Palermo stone, that we use to establish Egyptian chronology as well. So it's not just Monotho, and we certainly don't worship him. So
Okay, so another quote here. So
Mhm.
Manetho, whose writings only survived as a partially preserved, garbled abridgment, did not intend for his history to be a chronological account of Egyptian history. Like everyone else in the ancient world, Manetho measured time in regnal years, which is essentially in the 5th year of King so-and-so.
Mhm.
And so Eusebius, the 4th century historian who quoted Manetho extensively, did not believe that Manetho intended for his regnal years to be added up consecutively. Eusebius says several Egyptian kings ruled at the same time. It was not a succession of kings occupying the throne one after the other, but several kings reigning at the same time in different regions. Because Manetho's history lists the reigns of kings who ruled simultaneously, historians should not add the years of the king's reigns together as if the kings ruled one after the other. So what it seems here is that Manetho's is, to continue, Manetho's
Mhm.
history is also inconsistent with contemporary Egyptian sources. Professor
Mhm.
J.H. Breasted said, author of History of Egypt, calls Manetho's history a late, careless, and uncritical compilation, which can be proven wrong from the contemporary monuments in the vast majority of cases where such documents have survived. So,
Mhm.
um, as it mentioned, the only texts that we have of Manetho were way, way later. Like,
Mhm.
what is that? Manetho is, what is he? Third
Third, it
century?
should
Was
be
that it?
third. I think, yeah, third.
Yeah, 3rd century BC. And then the earliest text we have of his, uh, we have, well, full text is Eusebius, but we also have Josephus, right?
We've got Josephus. We don't really use Josephus in Egyptian chronology, though. We use Monotho. We namely use his like how he framed the dynasties. I will admit, though, that not it wasn't beautiful. Like one dynasty followed another. I think we've kind of touched on that already, especially during the first and third intermediate periods, where some of these dynasties were ruling simultaneously or kind of stacked. So you had that going on, and partial quote here. Where was it? What did you say? Oh yeah, the succession of kings. Sometimes there would be two kings ruling. It would be a father son. So the son would come of age, and then he would co-rule with his dad until he died, and then that pharaoh would reign. So we take Egyptologists take that into account as well. We have examples of co-rulership. I think it's beginning in the 12th dynasty where you had one pharaoh, and then his son, when he came of age, co-ruled until his father died, and then he would reign, and then if he had a son, would do the same thing. So we do take that stuff into consideration without Monotho. So we do know Monotho gets made mistakes in his Aegyptaica. I think that's the source that we use is Aegyptaica. So we know that these kings, these pharaohs, weren't ruling beautifully. Like one pharaoh would reign, and then when he died, his son would take over. And then there was this smooth transition into the next dynasty if there wasn't anything. Usually, there was the good example of a succession crisis was the end of the 18th dynasty when neither I nor Horemheb produced an heir. So, and I was ancient by ancient standards because he was old. He was just old. He only reigned for 4 years. And then Horemheb reigned. And then when he died, he knew he didn't have a son. So he appointed his general Ramses the First to be, and Ramses' family is from the area of Avaris. So, um, but yeah, definitely. I'm sorry, I got off track there. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, we know that there were kings and dynasties that ruled simultaneously throughout Egyptian history. So to say that is, I don't know.
Well, it seems like you're saying that we do use Manetho's history of kings,
Yeah,
but at the same time, it's kind of like a guideline. It's not.
yeah.
We have a whole bunch of other evidence that we're incorporating into that, and most
Hmm.
of it fits well with Manetho, but not completely.
Hmm. Exactly. We don't really use Monotho 100%.
Gotcha.
So
But this is okay. So the other one they mentioned was the Sothic theory. Can you talk
Mhm.
about what exactly the Sothic theory is?
So the Sothic or Sothic theory is it follows the constellation Sirius or Sothis, which is the dog constellation, and it's a heliacal rising every 1,460 years. So that was more of, if I'm right, that's what the Egyptians used for their calendar. So we don't really use that to use chronology so much as far as coming up with an Egyptian chronology. Um, um, I think it's even been downplayed for a while, like over 50, 60, 70 years in the field of Egyptology. People, and maybe even older, people have been Egyptologists have downplayed it. They've revealed how unreliable it is. Um, Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Falk said that nobody, no archaeologist or Egyptologist uses it.
Yeah.
Uh, so, which is just super odd for I'm
Hmm.
no expert on the topic here, um, but I've read Christian Egyptologists, I've read James
Hmm.
Hoffmeyer, Kenneth Kitchen, watched a lot of David Falk, but I'm just super confused because I watched Patterns of Evidence, David Roll, where
Hmm.
him and these different people on Answers of Genesis, they're arguing that there's something wrong with the different chronology, and then they say the reason that they're wrong is because they're using bad dating methods, but the bad dating methods aren't even the ones that you're talking about or these other Egyptologists.
Hmm.
Can you under can you maybe clear this up? Like, what am I missing?
You're not really missing much. I mean, it's a faulty system. It's definitely unreliable, and I think one of the reasons why AIG, Answers in Genesis, and Roll think it's important is because it was used in the Egyptian calendar. So they think that because it was used in the Egyptian calendar, that it might be or is reliable to establish Egyptian chronology, at least according to the Egyptians. So that's probably one of the reasons why Roll wants to remove 300 years, um, because he thinks there are gaps in the chronology. Um, so by moving it 300 years, he thinks it solves these kinds of things. And it's interesting because Dr. Bryant Wood, who is an early date Exodus proponent, doesn't see a need to remove 300 years either.
An
And that's
early,
an early date Exodus. And I think
yeah.
he's a YEC as well. He's a young earth creationist as well. So even within their own camp, it's, there's some disagreement.
Brent Wood, the early date.
He's a
Yeah, go ahead.
ceramicist. Yeah. So
Because just
Dr.
for
Bryant
people
Wood,
not familiar with it, early
Doc,
date and late date. What are the two
yeah.
differences?
So Dr. Bryant Wood works at Associates for Biblical Research. He's now retired. He's a ceramicist, so he works with pottery all the time, and he's always wanted to redate the pottery for um in the Levant so that he can say that it supports an early date Exodus. He also thinks that the destruction layer that Kathleen Kenyon dated to the 15th century also supports an early date of the Exodus. When it's too old, Dr. Falk even mentioned it's too old. So did Dr. Kitchen and Dr. Hoffmeyer. They say it's just too old. The destruction layer doesn't fit. Um, so um, Lost track. Oh yeah. So that's part of what they're getting at with the early age of the Exodus. They want to use that 15th century destruction layer of Jericho that ties into the conquest. And since the conquest and Exodus rise and fall together, as Dr. Deaver says, another biblical, he's retired too, but said that they rise and fall together. So if you've got a 15th destruction layer of Jericho, then the Exodus happened 40 years before that. And so, yeah, so that's part of what the early daters say. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for us, uh, they we Lorenzo Nigro, who is an Italian archaeologist, has since 2019 discovered that Jericho was actually rebuilt during the late Bronze Age, but by mud brick. So we actually have a destruction layer now, and it was rebuilt by mud brick. So
Wait, so when exactly is the late date? What is
so the
that
late date
date range?
Exodus theory is that the Exodus occurred roughly around 1260, 65, and then we had the wandering for 40 years, so that brings us to like 1220. Then you had the conquest, which lasted about 7 years, according to the book of Joshua. And then that feeds right into the book of Judges, with the events happening in the book of Judges. And then
Yeah.
into the United Monarchy and stuff.
And then what's the exact date of the early date?
The early date thinks that the Exodus was in 1446, based off of 1 Kings 6:1 and the temple dedication inscription in 1 Kings 6:1, which lists 480 years in the Masoretic text. And we know that Solomon, in the fourth year of Solomon's reign, which would be 967-66, if you backtrack 480 years from that, you arrive at 1446, 1447.
Right.
And
So
there's
they
your
take
early
a
date.
yeah. So I was just going to say they take a super literal 480,
Mhm.
and that's what kind of decides the dates there.
Mhm.
So the Septuagint, which is the Greek text that was translated from Hebrew to Greek around
Mhm.
300 BC, maybe a little bit later. Um, it it has different ages in the text, and
Mhm.
I'm curious, like if the ages are different, and that what that means is the way they calculate the flood and the Septuagint actually goes back later. And if it goes back later, that means that it's not as much an issue with Egyptian chronology. So I'm curious, why do you think that there are, these younger creationists don't just take the Septuagint date?
The Septuagint has a different number. It has 440 years, instead of 480 years. Both numbers are divisible by 40, which in Hebrew is an idiomatic expression for a really, really long time. So, and it seems like they're also taking Genesis 5 and 10 literally as well, which they'll arrive at like what, 4004 BC for the creation of of the universe and everything in it.
Everything.
Yeah. So that's where they get their numbers from. Instead of most scholars will take those ages found in Genesis 5 and 10. I think at 10. I know 11's got some in there too. They take those numbers and apply them to the ages of clans rather than individuals. So that these people existed, like Adam, like, hundreds of years. Methuselah lived hundreds of years, and so on and so forth. That they'll attribute them to clans. These were important individuals inside their clan. So the clan was named after like Methuselah. It was named after Adam. It was named after, you know, on down the line. So,
Yeah. So what reason do, these younger Christianists or whatever, why wouldn't they just take the Septuagint text if that actually fits with the
if
flood and
they
Egyptian
took
chronology?
this, if they took the Septuagint number for 440, and even if they took that literally, they arrive at a 40, 50-year difference on their chronology, which would put them, I forget what pharaoh would be reigning, but it'd be late 18th dynasty. It could be Tut, and Tut didn't have a son. Or he had twins, but they were
Oh,
stillborns. Um, which, so, yeah, it would, it wouldn't work if they did that, if they took the Septuagint.
So wait,
Especially the first king.
basically you're saying that it's very dependent on that 480 figure in First Kings 6:1, and if they take the 440 figure, then that means that there's basically no evidence for the Exodus, and that doesn't make any sense. So
Mm-mm.
they want to go with the thing that makes even maybe just a little bit of sense
Yeah.
in somewhere else compared
Yeah.
to or maybe what they think is a lot of sense. And I guess they'd rather just push Egyptian chronology out of the way because other reasons, I guess. So
Yeah.
you said that a lot of scholars say that they're clans.
Mm-hmm.
What reason would we have to think that these really long ages are clans? I mean, is there other passages in the Bible that talk about the clans or the
Um,
genealogies of clans?
yeah. First of all, the Hebrew word there should not be translated family; it should be translated clan. I don't have the verse here. I don't want to spend too much time looking up uh the verses here, but some of the translations aren't as good, and they should be translated as clan instead of family. That's where the miscommunication and misinformation lead to. I think so. If it's clan, actually the word should be translated clan. It makes much more sense. We have clans that have. The problem is we don't really know how clan life works here in the Western world. We still have remnants of it in the Western world, like in Scotland. We have clans that exist for hundreds of years, and they're named after a certain individual. But here in America or Canada, for example, we really don't understand um, clans because we're more family centric, for lack of a better term. So that's why it was a clan life then. They for example, Abraham had an area where he worked out of, and then his clan, like his descendants, his sons, would go out and they would do it, and then they'd report back to Abraham. We see that in Genesis 12, I think, or even a little later, when he settles in near the Dead Sea. So it's a good example of clan life. And his father, Terah, uh, 200 years, he was an important person. So his clan was 200 something years old at that time.
That's interesting.
So
So, but it seems like Adam lived 130 years. He had a son in his own likeness and his own image named Seth. And after Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters.
Adam's clan was like
Altogether,
130 years old when he had, and then
oh,
Adam's
interesting.
clan lived on all those years later, like 830, I think.
Yeah, so 800. Adam lived 800 and had other sons and daughters.
Yeah.
Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years. Then he died.
Yes.
So
So
the
his clan was
clan
that
lasted
long,
but
900.
then it says later. It says when Seth had lived 105, he became the father of Enosh,
Yeah.
and
So
yada yada yada. Yeah, go for it.
so that would be a splinter clan. Seth started his own clan. So clans aren't like totem poles. You'll have like splinter clans that come out of the main clan sometimes. Like Cain, when he killed Abel, was probably he started another clan after he, the fratricide. So things like that, and you see that down the line.
It's been
Yeah,
great.
it
It's
has.
been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot here today. I hope everyone else has here too. Can you tell everyone about your YouTube channel, what you talk about, and yeah, everyone should go check it out.
Yeah. So, Linguist Amo is my YouTube channel, and on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, I'll upload a video of just reading through biblical Hebrew. And on Fridays, I usually publish a reactionary video. And if I have time, I usually try and do like YouTube shorts on text criticism, Old Testament text criticism, where I'll pick a verse, um, I'll choose a verse, and we'll study. We'll go through like a minute. I'll describe how text criticism would interpret or translate that verse, and what's wrong with it, which translation we um, choose so over another. So
Awesome.
that's my channel. Subscribe.
Yeah, everyone should go subscribe. It's a really great channel. A lot of good reviews, different views of Genesis and Exodus, and linguistic analysis of different views, but arguments from Petrovich and stuff like that. So everyone should go check it out. A lot of really good stuff on his channel. Like and subscribe here. Hit the notifications. It's been awesome. Adam, I hope you have a great rest of your night.
You too.